Hi everyone, welcome back to Law Wednesdays. My name is Jharna Saijwani and I'm here to talk about a very legal contemporary issue, which is that of transgender rights in India. Now, as you might all be aware that last month was the Pride Month, and जब हम Pride Month की बात करते हैं, we see a lot of parades, protests around the world that happen, and we've seen a lot of parades happening in India as well. So if we look at the idea of Pride Month, it includes a community, which is the LGBTQIA plus community. Now, under this term, there is a very important facet of the community, which is the transgender persons. हम जब भी Pride Month की बात करते हैं, LGBT community की बात करते हैं, बहुत बार हमने ऐसा देखा है कि हम transgenders के बारे में या उनके rights के बारे में बात करना भूल जाते हैं. So this topic is going to take you through that, along with explaining you what transgender persons exactly are, what are the rights available for them, what are the kind of issues that they face, and what are the changes that have happened in the country over the last few years, and also what is it that we can do as a particular government and citizens of this country to empower them much more. So before we begin talking about what transgender people actually are, let's understand what is the difference between sex and gender. आपने कई बार आपके forms में कहीं अगर आप जा रहे हैं बैंक forms या medical forms, उसमें आपने देखा होगा they ask you what is your sex, what is your gender. These two terms are very interchangeably used, but actually there's a lot of difference between the two. So essentially, sex is actually the physical organs of an individual, so it can determine whether that person is male or female, whereas a transgender person, or when we are talking about gender in this particular scenario, it does not involve the physical organs, but what is it that the individual relates to when we are talking about their gender. So the gender is more of a psychological aspect, whereas sex is more of a physical aspect when we are talking about human body. So before we begin the definition of this is very important for you to understand that gender is merely a mental or a psychological identity that anybody attaches to. Now, this is where transgender definition becomes important. So, it is essentially those persons who do not match with the gender that has been assigned to them at the time of the birth. So, generally, for an example, if a person A has the physical organs of a male, but he does not understand or he does not attach himself to the idea of being a male and maybe understands or attaches himself to the idea of a female, then that individual is known as a transgender person. And there are a variety of things which are included under it, which is the trans man, trans woman, persons with intersex variations, so on and so forth. We generally also attach terms like kinner, hijras, and all of them with these transgender people. So that is the idea of a transgender person, and that's the definition of who transgender persons include and what they are. In India, for the first time during the 2011 census is when we spoke about what transgender people are in the country and how many of them actually exist. And as per that census, it was actually found out that there are 4.8 million citizens in India who identify themselves as transgender. So yes, we need to understand कि ये बहुत बड़ी community है और इनके बारे में, इनके rights के बारे में बिल्कुल बात नहीं होता है. तो आज हम इस topic में वो बात करेंगे. But before we begin and understand what are the rights, we need to understand what issues that they face. आपने बहुत जगहों पे transgender persons को देखा होगा. A lot of people would have been told that, you should stay away from them and things like that. But they are a particular community. Like I said, 4.8 million people in this country attaching to that identity. So obviously they need to be spoken about. और उनके क्या issues हैं वो हम देखते हैं. सबसे पहले उनका जो issue है, which is lack of legal protection. When we are talking about the legal aid provisions, when we are talking about the rights they have when it comes to in prisons or things like that, they are actually not treated differently. They are actually more than treating differently or in a special manner. उनके साथ बहुत सारा abuse होता है, बहुत सारा torture होता है. हमने बहुत सारे cases देखे हैं हमारे country में जहाँ transgender persons जो कि अगर जेल में हैं या अगर हॉस्पिटल में हैं तो उनको उनकी आइडेंटिटी से रिलेटिंग कोई स्पेशल ट्रीटमेंट नहीं मिलता. उनको या तो एक मैन या एक वुमन के तरीके ट्रीट किया जाता है, विच इज़ एब्सोल्युटली नॉट राइट. The second issue that they face highly is poverty. Now, where does this come from is the fact that they are not entitled to education. They are not entitled to employment in this country. There are no special provisions which are made for something as basic as restrooms or washrooms for them. So in such a scenario, they are actually demotivated to not take up education, not take up jobs, because a lot of these employment places do not even consider transgender people. In fact, forget considering, अगर वो उनको पता चलता है कि there is a transgender person who is applied, they absolutely reject it, which is what leads to poverty, which is what leads for them to begging at different places that we see in this country, and which is absolutely not okay or respectable for these people. The other major issue is harassment and stigma. Like I said in the beginning also, आपको भी as a student, as an individually बहुत बार बोला गया होगा कि अच्छा please stay away from hijras and things like that. ये बहुत बड़ा स्टिग्मा और टैबू बन चुका है हमारी सोसाइटी में. हम उनको एज अ पार्ट ऑफ हमारी सोसाइटी ही कंसिडर नहीं करते. इनफैक्ट उनको इतना हरासमेंट होता है, ऑल काइंड्स ऑफ फिजिकल, मेंटल, इमोशनल, वर्बल, कि वो एक्चुअली बहुत डिमोटिवेट हो जाते हैं. दे डू नॉट वांट टू टेक अप any other jobs except for begging. In fact, we've seen a lot of cases where transgender persons have actually committed suicide because they were not given enough respect or they were not allowed to live with dignity in this country. The other kind of issue that is there is violence, like we have spoken about these prisoners. So in that scenario, we see a lot of transgender persons जिनको prison में बहुत mistreat किया जाता है या बहुत सारी जगहों पे उनको mistreat किया जाता है. Actual physical abuse होता है उनके साथ और उनके health care को लेके कोई बात ही नहीं होती है. So this is a very important problem that we need to address, that they cannot be physically tortured, abused in any manner. And last is barriers to healthcare. अब अगर हम healthcare की बात करते हैं, as an individual who is a man or a woman, उनको बहुत सारे special provisions. A man and woman are generally separated when it comes to the different treatment of healthcare that is there. But एक transgender को वो कभी treatment नहीं मिलता है. In fact, उनको basic उनके checkups के लिए भी बहुत सारा struggle करना पड़ता है. Forget taking medication. A lot of doctors in this country have actually even refused to take up cases where there are transgender persons involved because they do not want to attach themselves to them. So this is a whole lot of stigma and taboo that has been going on even in today's era that we are talking about. We're talking about 2023, and we still see that transgender persons are facing these issues, which is absolutely shameful when India is progressing at such higher lengths. So we need to understand how we can make it better for them. And fortunately, the Indian judiciary has been very helpful and has made us understand, and also not just us, but actually given them a lot of identity. So the Nalsa judgment in 2014, which the Supreme Court had decided in 2014, has actually given a legal status to a transgender person. They have officially declared transgender persons as a third gender in India. ये इससे पहले एक्चुअली नहीं हुआ था, और ये जजमेंट नालसा वर्सेस यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया बहुत ही बड़ा लैंडमार्क जजमेंट था, जहाँ पे उनको ये राइट्स दिए गए थे और एक्चुअली उनको आइडेंटिटी और रिकॉग्निशन दिया गया था, जो कि इससे पहले कभी नहीं हुआ था. इसके बाद से ही अ लॉट ऑफ प्लेसेस वेयर द लेजिस्लेचर और द पार्लियामेंट हैज गॉन अहेड एंड मेड चेंजेस where transgender persons can officially be recognized, including things like medical forms, healthcare forms, bank forms, so on and so forth. सो ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट जजमेंट है जहाँ उनको आइडेंटिटी दी गई, उनको राइट्स दिए गए हैं. और उससे ज़्यादा द सुप्रीम कोर्ट एक्चुअली वेंट अहेड एंड सेड दैट बोथ सेंट्रल एंड स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स नीड टू फॉर्मुलेट, रेगुलेट social welfare policies and make provisions for protection of transgender persons, because in this judgment it was understood that transgender persons actually face a lot of atrocities, lot of violence, जिसकी वजह से, like I said, they're demotivated in life. They do not want to take up any form of careers or employment, and due to which they face a lot of stigma. So इसको मिटाने के लिए, इसको दूर करने के लिए, the judiciary has actually instructed the central and state government to come up with policies, which has actually happened, which we will talk about in the upcoming session of this particular topic. Other than that, what the Supreme Court said is that all transgender persons are entitled to fundamental rights. These are the fundamental rights which are laid down under Article 14, 15, 16, 19 and 21. Like we all know, Article 14 talks about right to equality, Article 15 talks about non-discrimination or removal of any form of discrimination that may be attached. Article 16 talks about no form of discrimination which should be there when it comes to employment opportunities. Article 19 talks about freedom of speech and expression, and last is Article 21, which talks about right to life, and that too with dignity. Now that we've spoken about the NALSA judgment, and now that we've understood that they actually are recognized as an official gender in the country, let's understand what are the different laws that protect them or that are specifically designed for them. So first and foremost is, like I said, Constitution. Constitution में right to equality under Article 14 clearly says that there cannot be any discrimination on the basis of sex or gender. And here, this particular article, this particular provision clearly gives them that kind of protection कि अगर कहीं पे भी उनके साथ any form of discrimination हो रहा है, be it job, be it educational institution, be it a hospital, anywhere this sort of a thing happens, they are protected under this, which has, like I said, happened only because of the NALSA judgment. The second important protection that they have is under Article 15, which clearly says that there has to be a prohibition on various grounds, including gender. तो अगर कोई भी discrimination होता है, अगर इनफैक्ट उनको reservation भी नहीं दिया जाता है, तो भी they can actually file a case for a violation of this particular fundamental right under Article 15, and they can go to the High Court or the Supreme Court challenging the same. Then comes freedom of speech and expression, which is laid down under Article 19. They, as any individual or any citizen in this country, have the right to not just express themselves, not just speak out their minds, but also be actually open in the public about their gender, not have to hide the same. They can actually identify themselves as transgender persons and not go ahead and live in a closet in any kind. So this is also something which is there. So if because of their being a transgender person, they are not allowed to display their own identity or live with their own identity, they can file a case under Article 19. Then comes Article 21, which talks about right to life and personal liberty. Here, like any individual, like I said, they have the rights to be protected, not just be protected, they have the right to live with dignity, with respect, and if they are mistreated in any manner where this particular right is taken away from them, then in that case they can again go ahead and file a case with respect to violation of this particular fundamental right. Now, a very important thing that happened in 2020 was the enactment of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. So ये 2019 में formulate हुआ था और इसका actual application started in 2020. Now this is a law which has been specifically created for the protection of transgender persons, for the protection of their rights in India. इससे पहले, before 2019, there has been no specific legislation which talks about their rights, which talks about how they need to be protected. And the best part about this is that it goes on and talks about different kinds of rights, including employment, education, healthcare, medical facilities, financial facilities, and all of that. So this is a huge change that we have seen in India in 2019 with the enactment of Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. However, there is still a lacuna in the act in terms of there is an act, but the actual application of it is something that we haven't seen. So how can we address that, or how we can change that, is something we'll look into eventually. Then comes the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989. So now, after this judgment, if there is a transgender who belongs to the backward communities, including SC or ST, and if they are mistreated, if there's any atrocity or violence which is against them, then in that case they can also go ahead and file a case pertaining to this act, and they can actually get some form of remedy, they can actually get justice. So like I said, there has been immense change because of the Nalsa judgment, and like I said, Nalsa judgment is something we've already discussed. It covers all the fundamental rights that are available to transgenders, and not just that, it talks about how different state governments and central governments should make special provisions for transgender persons. Then comes the Puttaswamy case. Now, Puttaswamy case, as is famously known as the right to privacy case, has also discussed aspects of privacy with respect to transgenders. They have actually gone ahead and said that any transgender person in the country has the right to their private life. They can actually have the right to stay in a place that they want to. They can cohabitate with any of their partners if they want to, and nobody, including the police or anybody, can interfere with that. So this is again something which has been spoken in the justice case Puttaswamy versus Union of India, where right to privacy has been granted to all individuals, specifically to transgender persons as well. Then comes the Indian Penal Code. Now, the Indian Penal Code has also been a very important legislation which has helped transgenders. So, like I said, there is obviously there cannot be discrimination, any form of torture. But other than that, the decriminalization of Section 377 has been very instrumental. जिसके बाद से actually transgender persons also, if they are involved with a partner of their own in any form of activity in their private space, they cannot be asked to stop that, or they will not be considered as criminal. So this has been an immense fresh change which was long due in the country, which happened with the decriminalization of Section 377. Also, IPC also talks about how, when we are talking about the different crimes that may be committed, and if there is a crime that is committed by transgender persons, they have to be treated in the equal manner, in the same manner. In addition to this, the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, which talks about how the procedure of arrest, bail and other activities pertaining to an arrest can take place or a criminal procedure can take place, वो भी ये बोलता है कि अगर transgender persons have been arrested, they have to be given a different kind of treatment in jail, they have to be given special treatment, and also they have to be treated in an equal manner. अगर उनका arrest भी हो रहा है, any form of bail provisions are there, they have to be treated in the same manner. So this is what the laws that we're talking about in India. We have multiple laws which are protecting transgender rights, and like I said, this has been an immense and an important change that was required since a very, very long time, because like we know that transgenders are not a new concept. They are actually individuals who exist in our community, they stay with us, but unfortunately they cannot come out of their closet, or they've been mistreated for such a long treatment that they are not recognized in India, and it is time that we start doing that. Now, after talking about the laws, let's understand what are the personal rights that these transgender persons have. Like you and me as a man or a woman, we have certain personal rights. These people also have certain personal rights. So the first and the foremost is protection from abuse. Like I said, the Transgender Protection Act and the Domestic Violence Act both go ahead and talk about how they are to be protected against any form of abuse. It could be physical, verbal, emotional, any abuse that is there, they are protected under the Transgender Protection of Rights Act 2019. Also, Domestic Violence Act of 2005 says that if there is a transgender person who is married to either a man or a woman, and if they are facing some form of atrocity or some form of violence in their marriage, they will be treated in the same manner as a woman would be treated. So this is also something which as a right that they have when we are talking about protection from abuse. Then comes residence. So like we've spoken about Article 21, which talks about living with dignity, living with respect. So Article 21 and the Nalsa judgment have gone ahead and said that transgender persons have the right to residence, because हमने ये बहुत देखा है कि a lot of transgender persons do not have access to homes. In fact, a lot of landlords in overall country we've seen they do not are or not ready to give their houses on rent also for transgender persons, or if they want to go ahead and buy any property, they're not given that kind of treatment. They are actually thrown away, or they're not given the same treatment that ideally should be given to them. In fact, the government has gone ahead and also set up special homes for them. Garima Grahs is what they call them. And in case they need a place of residence, they can actually go ahead and take residence here. So this is also a very important personal right they have. The other is marriage and divorce. Now, when we talk about marriage and divorce, transgender persons, like any other man and woman, can get married under the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act. And if they do so, they will be given that identity, that certificate that is there. However, like I said, we have still not seen a change in the specific legislations where terms like bride and groom are still being used, but transgender persons or others as a term is not being used anywhere. But like I said, they do have this personal right, which again the Nalsa judgment and the Puttaswamy judgment have gone ahead and given this right to them. Now, another, which is one of the most important rights, is protection from sexual harassment. Now, other than just not having the other rights, they are also sexually mistreated, harassed at a lot of instances, not just at specific places, but also at places like where they work or where they go for education. In fact, even in prisons, we have seen that. So in case if they're working at a particular place and if there is sexual harassment against them, like if there is against a woman, they can also file a complaint with the internal complaints committee that exists in the employment place of employment, or if any educational institution or university, if there is any sexual harassment, they can go ahead and file a complaint in the same manner that a woman can. So these are the personal rights that are available to transgenders in the country, and like I said, these need to be protected under all circumstances. Now, what is it that we can do to uplift the transgender persons? अब हमने बात किया कि ये laws हैं, ये personal rights हैं, ये सब तो हो गया है country में, but still we see a lot of taboo, stigma, a lot of judgmental looks that we've been given to the transgender person. So what is it that we can do to uplift them as a society, as an individual? How can we go ahead and help them? So the first and foremost is bringing transgender inclusive policies. Like I said, the NALSA judgment has clearly said that there should be policies of social welfare to regulate, to bring them in the limelight or to bring them in the normal circumstances that we are talking about. लेकिन आज भी हमने ये देखा है कि most of the employment places, most of the educational institutions, most of the hospitals do not have a special kind of treatment for the transgenders. Like I said, in fact, there are not even washrooms that are available for them. So we need to address this. We need to come up with policies where we can actually go ahead and talk about how they can be protected both in the public and in the private spaces. And this is the duty, or this is something as a certain right that they have, and this is the duty of the companies, both public and private, who should come up with this, including hospitals. So that's one important thing that we can do, or we can at least try to do and educate ourselves in this regard. Then comes addressing social concerns. Like I said, that they have been given a lot of mistreatment, they have undertaken a lot of violence, but now it's time to stop. So how can we do that? Like I said, we can actually come up with special policies for the societal concerns with respect to residence, with respect to marriage, if there are, that they face, so that in any case, if there is such a societal concern that is there, they have the right to be protected. And not just that, actually ये form of discrimination होना ही नहीं चाहिए. जैसे मैंने पहले बोला, अगर residence उनको नहीं दिया जा रहा है, ये एक बहुत important right है, right to live with dignity, right to a house that everybody has, and if that is also being taken away from them, that's not right. So we, as people living in this society, we need to start taking measures how we can come up with this. In fact, even a lot of companies can come up with a special washroom for them, just so that of the fact that they can be given comfortable treatment when they are working at a particular place. Or a lot of educational institutions can come up with hostel accommodation specifically for transgender people so that they do not have to live as a man or a woman. So these are the social concerns that need to be addressed. Then comes financial security. Like we all know, finance is something which is a very important thing for all of us, and of course the transgender persons are not behind in this regard. So we need to come up with special or liberal policies, credit facilities maybe for them, so that they can be given some opportunities to either start a venture of their own or to buy a house for themselves, so that they can actually come up in the society like they should be treated. So that's another important thing that we can do. And then if there are any transgender persons in prisons, like I've discussed this multiple times, give them special treatment, give them special kind of cells where they can be arrested and kept, so that they do not have to face any form of atrocity. Then comes marital right and inheritance right. Now inheritance, as we all know, comes from marriage, but हमारे Hindu Marriage Act, Special Marriage Act, ये भी सिर्फ यही बोलते हैं bride and groom. There is no mention of other gender anywhere, and inheritance का तो उनके पास कोई right ही नहीं है. So this is something that we need to give to them so that they can be attached to the same thing that we all have been. So that's another thing where we can bring some changes. Of course, as a legislature, these changes need to be made, but we can also start making some form of amends in this regard. Then comes employment rights. Like I said, a lot of employment places do not give them any form of opportunity, or they don't even consider their application, and they're thrown out at the moment that they see that there is a transgender person involved. So this is completely wrong. We need to come up with some ways where they can be granted employment opportunities. Of course, the government is doing its bit, but the private sector also needs to start doing its bit. And last is the adoption rights. Like a man or a woman, they also should have the right to adoption. But today, when we are talking about adoption rights, it is only available to a couple, and for that the consent of both the partners in a marriage or when they are a couple is required. Here, why should they be not allowed to adopt? So this is something, again, as a legislature or as a policy that we can come up with, where they can be allowed to adopt. So this is another way how we can uplift them. This is all from my side with respect to transgender rights. I hope that this video was helpful. I hope we have become more and more comfortable with the idea of transgender persons in the society, and maybe take more measures to uplift them, because like I said, we are in 2023 and these are things that shouldn't be left behind. So I hope this was helpful, and all the very best. For more such videos, please stay tuned to our YouTube channel. Thank you and bye-bye.